Alright, so let's move on to our last drop-down menu, which is our examination. This is probably the most difficult part of our 3, which is why I saved it for last. And there's a couple ways of going about item examination, and we're going to use the scene capture method. Basically, what this method does is we have a camera shooting an object that doesn't view anything else in our scene. So the camera will be placed somewhere in our world, our object will be in front of it, and our camera will not pick up anything else. We will create an actor that swaps out the static mesh in front of the camera based on our selected item in our inventory. So, in our inventory folder, which we are already in, but we can go to Content, Blueprints, Actors, Inventory. We want to create a new blueprint class of type Actor, and we want it to be called BP Examination. And this will be the actor that switches out the static mesh based off what item we are examining that we will place in front of our camera. So we can open it up. I'm just going to close everything right here. Okay, and let's add a static mesh. And we can just leave it as static mesh. For default, let's add the door key, just to have something we can view. Alright, looks good. So that's all we'll need for now. And let's add a scene capture to our scene. So up here in the Modes tab, under these classes, we can search for Scene Capture, and we want to choose Scene Capture 2D. We'll just drag it into the world, and it looks like a camera. So let's just change this to unlit just for a minute. And let's drag this out just outside of our map so that we never see our BP examination item in the world. Let's now take our BP examination item and put it in the world, and then let's parent it to our scene capture. Then we can set the location to 0, 0, 0, which puts it right in front of the camera, and we can drag it out about 20 units on the X. Might be a little close. We'll do 40. Feels pretty similar to the icon episode so far, doesn't it? So we need to get this view of the key from this camera as a material. So we need to translate the view of this camera, of this key, to a texture target so we can make it a material that we can add to our HUD. So to do that, let's go to Blueprints and let's make a new folder. We'll call it Render Targets, just for a place to store it. And we can select our camera here and scroll down. And here we have this thing called a texture target, which outputs the render target of the scene capture that can be read in materials. Oh, look at that, they misspelled materials, that's funny. Anyway, we need to create a new one, so we can just click on None, and up here we can click Render Target, and we can choose Blueprints, Render Targets, just to choose the folder, and we will call it Examination Render Target 2D. And now it has been created. So we can open this up, and what we are seeing here is kind of an outline. So this outline thing in the middle right here, this is the key, and this is the side of the building. If we go into the world, that's the side of the building we're seeing on the right here. I wanted a bit higher quality, so I'm going to change this from 256 to 512 by 512. Sometimes it needs to refresh itself, so we can close it, reopen it. Yeah, that worked. And as you can see, the lines are a bit sharper now, and you can make it higher quality if you want. I think 512 by 512 is fine. Now, obviously, we don't want to be able to see this building in the background. And we're also going to need some lights for the key over here. So let's deal with the lights first, just so we'll be able to set this to lit and actually be able to see our key. So first thing I think I'm going to do is drag out the scene capture, which will bring our examination item with it because it's a child, far enough so that the lights we add don't affect our actual scene. We kind of want this to be separate from everything. And I'm going to turn it to face the building, and the only reason I'm doing this is to show in the future when we actually set it to only being able to see the key, just so we can compare kind of side by side. So that looks good. So if we save, this is updated, this little section right here, that's the key, and this is the building. That looks good to me. So let's add that 3-point lighting setup that we did in the icon episode. So we can just get lights, point light, and I'm going to make it a child of the scene capture as well. So I can make it 0, 0, 0. And how far do we pull this off? 100. We can do negative 100 on the Y and negative 100 on the X and 100 on the Z. Yeah. And we can change this back to lit, so you can kind of see what we're looking at. Let's get rid of this white sphere in the examination item, just so it's easier to see our key. So we can click on it and choose Edit BP Examination. And this default scene right here, we can just add a component scene, and we can just replace the default scene root with this scene. And that gets rid of that white sphere in the middle. And that's a little easier to see our key. So we get our light. Could try setting it to something like 15. We can hold down Alt and drag it off to create a new one. Negative 100, 100, and 100. I dragged it perfectly. We only want this to be 50%, so this will be 7.5. And let's drag off this one. And we'll make it X 100, Y negative 100, Z 100. And this one will be 20%, which is 3. Okay, kind of take a look at that now. And I think the lighting looks fine. So let's create a new material so we can view our render target here. You can actually see in the preview of the render target kind of what it looks like. The key's a little farther away, so let's... oh, this somehow got disconnected from our scene capture. Don't know when that happened. You can just reconnect it right there. And we'll zero it out. And instead of 40, we can make this 20 for now. Save, and as you can see, the render target's been updated. We can kind of see it right there. We can rotate this just to make it a bit easier to see, but we'll remember to rotate it back. Oh, my cat's making noises over there. We'll make sure to rotate it back, because when we want it to rotate it, we want to rotate the mesh inside the actor, not the actor itself, but just for the sake of being able to see what a render target kind of looks like right there. But let's create a material. So we'll go to Content, Materials, and we can create it here. So right-click Material, and we'll type in M, Examination. You can open that up. And the type of material this is, we don't want it to be a surface, which is just what you put on regular meshes. We want it to be user interface, because it's a material for our HUD. And we don't want it to be opaque, we want it to be translucent. And this is because we are getting rid of the background and only keeping the item. So the texture we want as our final color, that is our render target that we made. So we go to Blueprints, Render Targets, it's right here. We can just select it. And if we go back into Examination and hold down the T key, and then click, it creates a texture sample for us, and it'll automatically assign it to whatever we have selected in our browser. Assuming it's compatible, of course. So we have now our render target as our texture. So we'll plug in RBG to final color. And now we can see what our material looks like. And we need our alpha here to go into the opacity. But this is going to invert it. So you can kind of see we have this weird outline. We don't want that, so we need to invert it again by getting a 1- node and just putting it through that. And now the background is black again, but it is now being keyed out. You also want to make sure that this sampler type is set to linear color. Mine did it automatically, but I know occasionally it doesn't. I'm not sure when it does and when it doesn't, but just make sure the sampler type is set to linear color. So we can save and apply this, and saving it will automatically apply. And we can do the same thing we were doing with this in content, go to materials, and we can kind of see what we're looking at here. Now in this preview, you can see obviously this checkerboard material is the stuff that is masked out, and you can see the key, and you can also see the building in the background. Now let's make it so this can only see the key at all times. So we can click on our scene capture, and if we scroll down here, we have this thing called a primitive render mode, and we can click it and we can choose use show only list. And we have this list down here called show only actors, and we can add as many actors as we want to this list, and whatever actors we choose, those will be the only ones rendered. So let's add one, and takes the little eyedropper tool, and let's select the examination. Great, so let's save, and now this material is updated, and you can see the building in the background has disappeared, and we can only see our key. Cool, so we just now need to be able to update whatever mesh this actor is showing, depending on what item we are examining. So we need to add that to our item data struct. So let's go into blueprints, structs, and open sitem data. And let's pull this down. And we need to add a static mesh so it knows what static mesh to add to our examination. So let's press new variable, and we'll type in examination mesh, and this will be of type static mesh. Choose right here, static mesh object reference. We also need a examination mesh offset, which is a float. As you can see, this BP examination right here, it is 20 units on the X value away from our scene capture, but not every item is, of course, the exact same size, and some will need to be pushed farther back to fit into the frame of our camera or be brought farther forward. So we also need a float to know how far / how close it should be to our camera. So let's create our examination mesh offset, and this will be a float. And while we're in here, we can see we have our can be used and can be dropped. Let's go ahead and also set our final can be examined. So we can just have can be examined. So we can have one each for each drop-down menu option. Change it to a Boolean, and I'm just gonna use these arrows to move it up right above can be dropped, just so they're in order, the same order they are in the menu. Of course, this is not a necessity, it's just a bit of organization. We also want the default of can be examined to be true. So let's save, and we can close that, and we have to open now our master inventory item to compile it so that we can go into the to children and update variables. So for the flashlight, yes, we want it to be examined. The examination mesh, we have to get just our battery mesh. So we just choose our battery static mesh. You just want to choose the same one that the pickup actor uses. And then examination mesh offset, let's leave it to 0 for now. We won't really be able to tell until we go into game and then come back and adjust accordingly. So let's open our door key. Let's do the same thing. Oh, this is the pickup actor. My bad. Back into inventory, choose the inventory item door key. And can be examined as true. Examination mesh will be our door key, static mesh, and our offset we'll also leave at 0 until we can figure out how to adjust it accordingly. Alright, so we need a widget to display our examination item. So let's go into content and UMG, and this can be part of our inventory. Let's save all 3 of these. So just hit save all, and let's create our widget, user interface, widget blueprint. So it'll be called W examination, and we can open it up. And we'll go ahead and leave this to filling the entire screen. So we don't have to delete the canvas panel or set it to desired. We'll leave it to fill screen, and we'll leave the canvas panel. Let's first add a background blur, just for aesthetic purposes. So we can add it to our canvas panel, make it fill the entire thing by setting it to fill. Change all the offsets to 0. Let's make the blur strength like 3, so it's just nice and blurry in the background. We'll give it a Z order of -1, so we make sure it's always defaulted behind everything else. We also need an image, and this image will be displaying our examination mesh. It'll be displaying the material that this scene capture shows. So let's add an image, just add it just to our canvas panel. Let's anchor it to the center, and let's make the size 512 by 512, because that's what I made it in our render target right here. If you remember, 512 by 512. And I want to center it, so I'll set this to 0 and 0. And once again, we need to set the alignment to the center, so we'll change that to 0.5 and 0.5. Let's make the image the material. You can set materials to images. So if we go to our content, materials, and this M examination material, we can set that to our image. So M examination, choose that, and there we go. We have our key displayed in a widget. Now if you want, we can also add like the name and the description, so we can go ahead and add those. We'll use size boxes. So let's just put the name on the left and the description on the right. So let's anchor this to the left middle, position Y at 0. Let's kind of drag it out a bit. We want the Y in the center, so we can change the Y alignment to 0.5. So Y0 is at the center. Make the size X 500, size Y 150, and let's bring it like 50 away from the left. Maybe a bit more, like, well, how much? Yeah, kind of want to make it even between this and this, so let's just eyeball it at like maybe 100. All right, 100 seems fine. So let's add a text to the size box, and we want to center the text for this one. We'll write item name. We'll set it to Calibri, which is our font. Make this one bold. Get rid of the shadow offset, and let's increase the size to like 50. Okay. All right, let's do the same for the description. So we can actually just copy and paste this size box. Select the canvas panel and hit paste. This size box, we can anchor it to the right over here. Set the position X to, oops, not the X. Well, yeah, X0 is fine. Y0 is fine. The alignment for Y, nope, not Y. We want to keep at 0.5. X can be 1. And what did we make this one? It was 100, so we can make this one -100 on the X. Let's increase the Y size a bit because it is a description. So maybe double it at 300, and then we can bring the Y down by 75 just to keep it going down. This text will be item description. We want it to be smaller, like 25. Can be light italic or whatever you want, and I'm going to vertically align it like this. Or I'll keep it on the center of the middle. I don't know, I'm just completely eyeballing here with whatever I think looks good. And we can, for the item description, we want to make sure it auto wraps. Because if we have something really long, it can, my fingers were completely offset. It auto wraps. Let's actually, to make it auto wrap correctly, let's horizontally align fill and change the justification to center. That's what I meant to do. All right, let's change these two texts to variables. So is variable, and we'll call this item name text. And we'll call this one is variable item description text. And lastly, before we continue, we want to be able to rotate this image, not the image, we want to rotate the actual mesh in the image when we drag our mouse around, so we can examine all sides of it. But we don't want to accidentally be clicking on any of these text or images and having it focus on all that. So we just want to overlay the entire thing with a big image that we can only click on that one. So let's add an image, add it to the canvas panel. We're going to rename it drag detection, and we're going to anchor it to the full and just set all the offsets to 0. And just to make sure it's always in front, we can set the Z order to 1. And to get rid of this white screen, we can take our color and opacity here under appearance and just set the alpha to 0. Alright, and that's all we have to do in here for now. We'll come back to it to add some blueprints to our graph. But first we need a reference to this in our inventory blueprint component. So let's go to Content, Blueprints, Blueprint Components, and BPC Inventory. And I'm just going to start closing these functions. Okay, just go to the event graph. And in our inventory, we just need to create the examination widget, so we can do it in the initialize after we did our character reference. So create widget, W examination, and let's just make this a variable, W examination ref. And next we need a reference to the actual BP examination actor right here. And to do that, we will get all actors of class and choose BP examination. And the only reason using the get all actors of class node here is safe is because we know we'll only ever have one BP examination in our world. So we can just get a copy, and it gets the first one in our world, or the one that has the index of 0, because that is the only one that is in our world. And we can just promote that to a variable. We'll call this BP examination ref. So the W examination ref is a reference to our widget, and the BP examination ref is a reference to this BP examination actor that's in our world. Now in our examination widget, we need a variable for the BPC inventory, so we can just create one. So BPC inventory ref, and we'll set this to BPC inventory object reference, and we need it editable, and we need to expose it on spawn. And then in our BPC inventory, we can set that variable to ourself. So in the examination widget, which we have a reference to now, we just need to set this widget we created, BPC inventory ref, to let it know we're talking about this one specifically. So set BPC inventory ref, and set this to self. Alright, and now we have our references all set up. So let's go back into the examination widget. We have to make a custom event to update the widget. We'll call it update widget. And we just need to update the name and the description, depending on the item. So let's give this an input of an index. You type integer. And we're basically doing the exact same thing we've been doing all these times. With the index, we will get our BPC inventory ref and call our function get item data at index with the index plugged in there. So it gets all the data from the index that we call update widget with. And from our items, we can get the class defaults, break the item data, and now we can get our examination mesh and the offset, or we just need the mesh here actually. So we can update the mesh from our BP examination actor. So let's get the reference to the actor from our BPC inventory. So we'll get BP examination ref. And we need to set the static mesh. I have BP examination open right here. We just need to set the static mesh to our new mesh, which comes from this struct. So we will get static mesh. And to make this actually clearer, let's rename it to something like item mesh. Anything that isn't static mesh, just so we can type get item mesh and then set static mesh. This can just be confusing because we'd be getting static mesh and then setting static mesh. So sometimes it's easy to get confused of when you're supposed to get, when you're supposed to set. So we are just setting the static mesh right here. We're setting this parameter inside our item mesh. And the new mesh will be our examination mesh. Now we have to set the offset for the mesh here. So we will set relative location. And let's split the struct bin because we only want to take it from the X. And let's also get the relative location. Split this as well. So the Y can go in the Y and Z can go into the Z. So those will not be altered. But for the X, we can plug in the examination mesh offset. That added to the relative location of the X, because it's 20 by default. So we want it to be 20 plus whatever number this is. And lastly, we just need to change the name and the description. So we can just get our item name text, set text, text. I did that a little fast. Let me just show you exactly what we're taking here. Set text, text. And the in text here will come from our item name. And we'll do the same for item description text. Set text, text. And we have to open this up, grab description, and plug that in. Let's get a reroute node. And we can collapse that again. Compile and save. So now whenever this update widget custom event is called, it'll update everything inside the widget that we need, plus the actual examination actor. And we'll call it right before we open up the widget. So let's go to the BBC inventory. And we just need a custom event in our BBC inventory to call this custom event, because it'll be a lot easier to call it from our inventory than from the widget directly. So we're just basically making a custom event that calls the other custom event. So let's call this create examination widget. And this one will also have an input index, type integer. And we're just getting our W examination ref, a reference to our widget. And we're just going to call the update widget custom event and plug index into index. And then after we create our examination widget, or after we update it, we actually want to add it to the viewport. But before we add it to the viewport, we want to remove the inventory widget. So let's get our W inventory menu ref, and we can set the visibility, and we want to set it to collapsed. And then we want to add our examination ref to our viewport. So we'll grab our examination ref, and we'll choose add to viewport. And let's open this dropdown, and let's change the Z order to 2, just to make sure it's always on top. And now let's actually call this custom event from our dropdown menu. So we have to go to content, UMG, inventory, and inventory dropdown. And we just need to call it when we press our examine button. So we can get our examine button right here, and then on released, like the others. And let's just copy and paste these three. So we get our player ref, our BBC inventory. We can call create examination widget, and our slot index as our index. And we can now test it out. So let's hit play. And let's pick up our 2 items. Let's pick up these first because there's like 80,000 door keys in this part right here. And let's just look at a clean slate to make it easy. Oops, I don't think I pressed E on the batteries. Okay, got it. And E. Okay, clean slate. Open our inventory. Click here and click examine. And we forgot to rotate this back. So let's change this rotation back to 0, 0, and 0. And let's hit play. 3rd time's the charm. Let's hit tab, examine, and it works. It says flashlight battery here to the left. We see an image of our flashlight battery, and we have the description here, add it to your flashlight to replenish your battery life. We still cannot drag it around, and we have a blurred background. Should also work for our keys. We have no way to close it at the moment, so I had to just close the game and reopen it. Examine. This door key. We're looking at our key right here, which is not rotated the way we want to, and use this to open a locked door. So let's create a way to actually close the widget once we opened it. So let's go to Edit, Project Settings. Let's add an input, and we're going to add this kind of universal input, and we'll call it return. And we're going to send it to escape. But we cannot use the escape key while we're previewing our game because the escape key closes our game preview. So we're going to add another one, and this will be our backspace. And this is just because we cannot use our escape key while previewing the game. So let's close that, and let's go to our game PP and player controller. And in the event graph, we just want to call an event dispatcher whenever we hit the return key. So we'll type in input return, and let's add the event dispatcher, and we'll call it pressed return. So essentially, what we can do with an event dispatcher is in our player controller, or in anything, we're just adding it in our player controller, we can call this dispatcher whenever we want. In our instance, it'll be after we press a button, and then in any other blueprint, we can call a reference to this player controller and tell it to call a custom event when this dispatcher has been pressed. So in simpler terms of what we're doing right here, we are calling our return button in our player controller, and then in individual blueprints, we can assign what this return button does localized to each blueprint. So let's drag out press return and release. We get some options here. We want to call it. We're only going to be using call and assign for now. So we're going to call it. So after we press it, so every time we press return, this dispatcher will be called. It has to be received from another blueprint for it to do anything. So let's receive it in our examination widget. So let's go to the construct. I'm going to delete these two. And in the construct, let's cast to our player controller. It's HD player controller. The object is get player controller. And as the controller, we want to search for assign pressed return. So we can assign the event dispatcher to this blueprint, and it's going to create two nodes for us. So the first one is the one that binds the event to press return, and the second is the custom event that it'll call. So the custom event, we can call it close examination widget. Let's just bring that up there, and let's bring this over here. So every time we press return in the player controller, if our examination widget is valid, this custom event will be called. And I can test that out for you with a print string. And we'll just say close examination widget. I spelled that wrong, but I'm not going to worry about fixing it. And I can hit play. And I'm going to hit the backspace key, and nothing's happening. So let's open our, or I have to pick up an item first. Let's pick up our batteries. let's open our inventory, let's examine, and now our W examination is valid, and I'm gonna hit the backspace key now, and it's telling us to close the examination widget. So that's just a overview of how that works. So let's delete the print string. And after we call our return, we just want to reopen the inventory. So to do that, we just need to close our examination widget and open our inventory by calling this toggle inventory event that we've already created. So when we close our examination widget, I want the examination widget to close and the inventory to reopen. So in our player controller, we have this variable isPaused in our custom event toggle inventory. What I want to do is just call this toggle inventory custom event again, but the issue is we need to first switch this variable back to false. And before doing that, I realized isPaused is not quite an accurate way of saying this. I think a more accurate way of what this variable should be called is inventory open, and that'll just update it for us. And in BPC inventory, after we set our visibility of our W inventory menu after collapsed and add our examination ref, we should just get our player controller and cast to HD player controller, and we can convert this to a pure cast because we don't need execution nodes, and we can just set is inventory open to false because it no longer is. Now in W examination, we can just call toggle inventory. Oh, we have to call it from here, of course. Toggle inventory, and this way it'll toggle it back on instead of off. And obviously we want this examination widget itself to close, so we can just call remove from parent. So let's test that out by hitting play, and let's grab something to examine, open our inventory, and when we examine, everything's the same, and then when we hit the backspace key, we are back in our inventory, and we can close our inventory like normal. Only issue is if we open our inventory, hit examine, and now it is registered as our inventory being closed. If we hit tab again, it'll reopen the inventory in the background, and all of a sudden this becomes messy and looks kind of unprofessional. So let's go to our player controller here, and we need a reference to the examination widget. So let's just create the variable W examination widget ref. Alright, we don't need the widget in there, just W examination ref. And it'll be of type W examination object reference. And we need to set this, so we do it in the BPC inventory. And here in the initialize, we just have to set it from our cast to HD player controller here. So we have our variable W examination ref. So out of our player controller, we can call the variable setting W examination ref, and we can let's put it before this right here, just to keep things a little organized. I'm gonna create a reroute node right there, and we just want to set the widget to this one we've created, so we can just get the variable and plug it in right there. So in our HD player controller, in our toggle inventory custom event, we just want to go to the end here, right before we set the input modes. We only have to move this one out, because we're only doing this if we're reopening the inventory. We just want to close the examination widget. So we can take our new examination ref variable, and we just have to ask if it's in the viewport. So we'll search is in viewport, and we'll create a branch from that. I am control dragging this over here, and if it is in the viewport, we just want to remove it. So remove from parent, and if it isn't in the viewport, we just want to continue on. So let's test this out. So let's go ahead and grab an item. We can just open and close our inventory like normal. And if we examine and hit tab, it closes our examination again, and it just repulls up our inventory. Hitting tab again will close it, and examining and hitting backspace will just open our inventory the same. Alright, in our next episode, we'll clean up the drop-down menu and add the ability to rotate our mesh while examining it.